What is happiness? What is our purpose in life? How can I create more happiness in my life? My life has no direction. My health is really bad. How can I possibly be happy? All giant questions. Maybe we can't answer them all. Maybe we can. But what we know for certain is that if we don't understand what happiness is, the answers to questions like these will always be out of reach. What is stopping us from being happy? This is the narrated version of a seminar that I presented to a group of realtors in my office back on Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. The purpose of the seminars was to create an understanding within the people who were participating of the nature of wellness, human wellness, happiness, and excellence, all of which are different facets of the same object. They're all interrelated, can't be moved one from the other. It was intended to be the first of a series of seminars to help people understand, first of all, the nature of happiness. And this seminar is specifically about an introduction to what happiness is, but also how it impacts your health, your relationships, your spiritual connection, and even your success in life. Now, before we get into a discussion of the nature and structure of happiness and how we can create more happiness in our lives, I just wanted to share with you some of the factors that have led me to have an interest in being human, what the essence of being human, how we can understand factors like happiness and how we can use techniques around um, being happy in order to increase our happiness and wellness and excellence. It's all related. I've been a successful realtor for 10 years, a personal development coach, senior sales executive, professional engineer. So, professional engineering allows me to take a look at vast amounts of data that don't seem to have any relationship and yet find patterns within that and then synthesize solutions and create models that allow us to have better understanding of these um, data sets and then create something that's useful for actually doing something with that data. And then continuous improvement, excellent experts. So excellence is a huge portion of what we're going to be talking about. And there are techniques from from this group of continuous improvement that allow us to create excellence in our life. And then I've been a certified trainer in skills for an empowered workforce. I have a family, my wife Bev, and we've been married for over 38 years now. We have a son, David, and Lisa. My wife, Bev, and David and I are on a real estate team. So we work together as a team in real estate. We've been quite successful in the past few years with that. But some of my heroes are Mohandas Gandhi, it's Mahatma Gandhi, John Kennedy, Martin Luther King. These three people are heroes to me because they made some inspirational goals that were seemingly impossible at the time that they stated them, and yet all of them have come to fruition. And then Jane Marchevsky is one of my heroes. I'm going to talk about her a little bit later. You may or may not know Jane Marchevsky, but I hope you do come to know her and love her like I do. I always begin these seminars by asking the audience to evaluate themselves and decide whether or not they are happy. It's a yes or no question. It's pretty simple. And as a member of the audience, I'm asking you to do the same thing. Just try and take a look at your life right now and just say either I am happy or I am not happy. And remember that. The obvious follow-on question to are you happy would you like to be happier? Now you may have said you're not happy, you may have said you are happy, or you may have said I don't really can't really tell whether I'm happy or not. The question still can be answered. Would you like to be happier? So I've asked you to consider whether or not you are happy, and also I've asked you to consider whether you'd like to be happier, and I presume you answered those questions. And regardless of how you answered those questions, the implication is that by answering them, you must know what happiness is. And when I'm in a live audience, I generally would present this question to the audience and say, since you have answered those questions and you presumably know what happiness is, why don't you tell me what it is or what your perception of what happiness is? And we usually have a little discussion, and most people don't want to participate in this, but some will. They'll say, what makes things that make them happy usually, or sometimes they draw a conclusion, which we'll see in a moment. After we've had a little bit of discussion about what happiness is, and very often people will tell me some of the things that do make them happy. And although I don't mean to diminish that in any way, shape, or form, because those things are true to them, it isn't really what happiness is. But very often we'll get somebody saying something like this: well, happiness means different things to different people, or that happiness is a basic human emotion. And if you're thinking along the same lines as this, then I want to jump in here right now and say, no, that is actually not the case. That there is a common universal meaning of happiness and how it can be applied to all of our lives. And that no, it is actually not an emotion like anger or fear. So I decided that I would take a look on the internet to get some insight into what happiness is. So I went onto Google, did a search on Google, and just put the term happiness in there to see what happened. And here are some of the interesting things that I was able to pull off of the internet from Google. Words of wisdom from the internet about happiness. To the thief who stole my antidepressants, I hope you're happy. And still some more wisdom from the internet about the nature of happiness. There's a picture of one of the most gorgeous sunrises ever with a beautiful flock of geese flying by it. And yet there's an inscription on the picture that says, there is no sunrise so beautiful that it is worth waking me up to see it. And still more tidbits of wisdom from the internet about happiness. All I ask is the chance to prove that lots of money can't make me happy. Now, of course, the internet is as much about entertainment as it is about providing you with information, but you can get to some detailed information from the internet. There are some sources that try and present a factual basis for some of the things that they say. So here's also from the internet, but Merriam-Webster, who produces dictionaries, says, what is the definition of a happiness? And they say it's a state of well-being and contentment, or B, a pleasurable or satisfying experience. And another very good source of information from the internet, generally speaking, is Wikipedia, who keeps a lot of data and is contributed and made live all the time with new contributions from people who are experts in the field. And when you ask Wikipedia about what happiness is, they define it as happiness is a positive and pleasant emotion ranging from contentment to intense joy. Now, we're lucky enough to live in a time, an era where things like artificial intelligence are coming along to help us be able to find information about topics that we know of and to find them into ways that make sense to us and that are understandable. One of those AI systems that's quite common is ChatGPT. So I thought, well, why don't I just ask ChatGPT to define happiness for us? And ChatGPT was quite helpful and provided this definition of happiness, saying happiness is a state of well being and contentment encompassing positive emotions and life satisfaction. It ranges from contentment to intense joy, often triggered by positive life experiences. And now I happen to like that definition. There's a lot in there that really does make sense and is probably usable. There's also a lot in there that not mimics, but incorporates information from the other two definitions that we just saw as well. So there's ChatGPT's definition of happiness. While we're on the topic of internet information and what you can find on the internet, one of the things that you can find on the internet through YouTube or other videos or even websites is some information about a performer, singer, who's went by the stage name of Nightbird with an E on the end of it. She appeared on America's Got Talent, which was a talent show, and then she sang a song that she wrote called It's Okay. And after she sang that song in discussion with the judges, and the discussion with the judges, to be honest with you, as far as I'm concerned, is as meaningful and as important as the performance that she made. But during that discussion with the judges, she made this statement: you can't wait for life to not be hard anymore before you decide to be happy. And if we take that just by itself and look at it, that is one of the most powerful statements that you can make about happiness and what we can do with happiness, num- just by itself. But when you take it also within the context of what she did and what she said to the judges and how she performed for the judges, it's even more stunningly important. Nightbird appeared on the show America's Got Talent on June 9th, 2021, while she was suffering and battling stage 4 cancer. And you could see when she walked on the stage that she was not well. She was very, very thin, slender, and had very short hair, as if she'd just been recovering from chemotherapy. And during her performance, so after discussion with the judges, she did made her performance. And during her performance, the judges and the audience sat in total silence. Not a sound came from them, not a clap, not a cheer, not anything. Many times they would show the audience, and you would see somebody wiping tears from their eyes as they're listening to it. And they and after she was finished with her performance, she stood on stage looking around because not a sound was coming from the entire audience until a few seconds later the judges stood up and started clapping, and then the audience erupted in a standing ovation after she stopped singing. Um, if you have a chance, look her up, Nightbird, America's Got Talent, and watch this on YouTube. You won't regret it. At least that's my claim. The judges awarded Nightbird with a golden buzzer for her performance, which means she was automatically elevated to be able to perform at the next levels of the competition. And then she had quite a nice interaction with the judges. And in my opinion, her interaction with the judges and her interaction with the audience is at least as important as the performance itself. But when she was asked by the judges how she could be so positive when she was facing such a difficult future, she responded with this stunningly inspirational reply: you can't wait for life to not be hard before you decide to be happy. Sadly, her health continued to deteriorate after that performance, and she was unable to continue the competition. And also, very sadly, she passed away on February 19th, 2022, at the age of 31. And when I heard that she had passed away, I was overcome with emotion and I cried. Nightbird is the stage name of Jane Marchevsky. And if you remember, I had Jane Marchevsky on my list of heroes. She is one of my heroes. That list of heroes are people who've inspired me in my life and continue to inspire me in my life to be something better than I am. And Jane Marchevsky made this great and incredible inspirational saying: you can't wait for life to not be hard before you decide to be happy. So I've told you that we can't really get an understanding of what happiness is just from looking into the information that's available about happiness. There is no common definition for happiness on the internet or through any resource that we have available to us. So let's start from scratch, just from our basic knowledge of life that we all share, and let us work through how we can derive the real meaning of happiness, a real working definition of happiness that will lead us to have the ability to create more happiness in our life. So let's start out with a really basic concept that we know to be true of all organisms, whether it's a simple organism like a bacteria, all the way up to more complicated mammals and even humans. There are two primary drivers in life of all successful organisms and species, and that is you must survive. So you're in danger of being killed when you're within your environment. You must be able to survive, to recognize the things that are causing you to be at risk, and you must thrive, meaning you must sustain your life by looking for the things that are going to make your life better, food, and being able to reproduce so that the species can thrive in the long run. Now, we interact with our environment in a number of key ways in order for us to be able to both survive and thrive. The things that put us at risk of dying, that make it unlikely for us to survive, cause us pain. The things that enable us to thrive reward us when we experience them with pleasure. All organisms that experience pain or pleasure have an unconscious mind. They have a mind. Some of them can think to some extent, some cannot. Like a porpoise, for example, has very well established cerebral cortex, and we believe they can do a little bit of thinking. They must have some sort of conscious mind as well as an unconscious mind. But all organisms have some form of unconscious mind, so that pain, since they all experience it, pain and pleasure must therefore be a feature of the unconscious mind. So let's talk a little bit about pain and pleasure and some of the characteristics that pain and pleasure have that we are aware of, but haven't really thought about perhaps. Pain and pleasure are not binary, they're not on and off. It's not like you switch and it turns on and you have pain, you turn a switch and you don't have it. Pain has various levels of intensity, and we even have words for the different levels of intensity that can go. And I've organized some of the words. I'm not saying these are all the words, but here are some words that we use to describe pain. And from a level of more pain to lower pain, less pain, or no pain, we have agony, ache, soreness, tenderness, discomfort, irritation, and none, all of which are getting from high intensity to lower intensity. And pleasure has the same same experience of different words that describe different levels, different intensities of pleasure. And I'm not going to say these are all the words. They're not. There's certainly a lot more. But here are some that I picked out that do describe different levels of intensity of pleasure: ecstasy, bliss, thrill, enjoyment, satisfaction, comfort, contentment, and none, more or less. So they do have levels of intensity, and we know that to be true. Another important factor to consider about pain and pleasure is that the stimuli that create pain and pleasure are additive. So, for example, if I have a sore shoulder, so I'm experiencing a sore shoulder, and I also bump my shin, then I have more pain by the combination of those two things than if I had experienced those stimuli independently. And as well, on the pleasure side of things, if I'm watching a movie and I'm really pleased about the movie, having experienced a lot of pleasure from that, and my spouse sits beside me and holds my hand, okay, then those two simultaneously experiences converge and add to your pleasure. We also know from our experience of pain and pleasure that they are directional. And what do I mean about this? It sounds a little bit odd, but when you think about it, it's very straightforward. If we experience pain and pleasure at the same time, they tend to cancel each other out. So, for example, if I have a sore shoulder, like in the previous example, and someone gives me an ice cream cone and I love the ice cream cone, the pleasure I experience from eating the ice cream cone may actually lead to me forgetting entirely about the pain from my shoulder. So, there is a direction to them. When we take those three characteristics that we discussed, that pain and pleasure have different intensities, have measurable and noticeable intensities, that pain and pleasure are additive, and that pain and pleasure have a direction, we can actually create a model of the state of our unconscious mind being somewhere between the two extremes of pain and pleasure, and we can plot our total experiences of all the stimuli that we're experiencing and position ourselves within that line. So maybe we're the sum of everything we're experiencing brings us pleasure, more pleasure than pain. Or, but perhaps on some days it's more pain than pleasure. And so we can actually plot ourselves on there. So I put a scale on here and I said, okay, so pain could go to minus 15. And so we're used to hearing people say, well, on a scale of 0 to 10, where would you put yourself? That's what this is designed to do. But pain, since we say pain will always dominate pleasure, like we'll never experience pain to get a little bit of pleasure. You usually don't. It's a bad decision if you do, because we put ourselves at risk of dying. So pain must be the primary driver before we can experience the stimulus that leads us to thrive. So pain has a minus 15 possible maximum, and pleasure has a plus 10. The plus and minus just indicate the directions, and the tens indicate the different intensities. And, and there we have a graphical representation of the state of our unconscious mind. So the graphical representation of the state of our unconscious mind is necessary to know whether we're experiencing happiness. It's not enough. It's not sufficient to define happiness. So we all know that there are a lot of experiences that we have in our lives that bring us closer to happiness that don't fit on that scale from pain to pleasure. For example, we have experiences that provide us with satisfaction and pride when we accomplish something. We do something. We use our talents and skills to get something done. Like, here's some examples, maybe finishing a marathon, climb a mountain, write a book, get a promotion, all of which provide us with additional satisfaction and pride, but not necessarily pleasure. They can, or pain. There probably would be some pain, but the, the main experience is not pain or pleasure there. And we also have feelings of helplessness and victimization when things happen to us that are outside our control. We get sick, someone we know is injured, the economy's experienced declining growth, et cetera, et cetera. Our state of being of the unconscious mind does not adequately capture these events. We know that our unconscious mind is only part of our state of being human. We know that we have a conscious mind. We use it all the time. We have a large cerebral cortex. We think about things, we contemplate, we analyze, and other organisms like porpoises and others may well have some of these abilities too. But our conscious mind is a very important part of being human. It's at least as important as our unconscious mind. So that leads us to a key question. Does our conscious mind have a similar structure that can also have a state that can be represented by a linear graph? Why is this important? We'll see how that develops into an important part of creating a model for happiness as well. Our unconscious mind has the two categories at the extremes of their existence of pain and pleasure. Our conscious mind also has two separate categories at extremes of their experience. One is fulfillment, which is a sense of pride and satisfaction when we use our talents to create an outstanding result. And the other extreme would be helplessness or victimization. When we have totally given up trying to control our destiny, we're helpless and at the mercy of outside events. And fulfillment and victimization are the extreme states in our conscious mind. We can look at the nature of victimization and fulfillment in much the same way that we looked at the nature of pain and pleasure. And first of all, we can say that victimization and fulfillment have different intensities. We can measure them. Okay, but so victimization, the top levels of victimization have words describing it like powerless, drudgery, and getting less and less victimization intensity, weakness, uncommitted, and none. And on the fulfillment side of things, we say, okay, fulfillment, we're delighted, we're pleased, we're gratified, we're satisfied, and varying down to no fulfillment whatsoever, none, all for more or less. So they have different intensities. We have words within our vocabulary that describe those different intensities. We can also say that the same things are true about fulfillment and victimization in the nature of them being additive and directional. So if we're having a really stressful day at work because we have a lot of deadlines, and later on we also find out that one of the deals we've been working on for 2 weeks has fallen apart, that increases our stress level and our feelings of helplessness and victimization. And maybe even we're driving home and we run after all that, we're driving home and there's a traffic accident on the throughway and it takes us an extra hour before we get home, all of which is adding to our feelings of helplessness and victimization. It's adding all those things, those different stimulus are adding together to create our experience. And then we get home and our children rush up to us and give us a big hug. Oh, we love you, Daddy. So good to see you. Haven't seen you in so long, and whatever. Can we play a game? And your wife comes up and gives you a hug and kiss and says, "Oh," and that diminishes your level of feeling of helplessness, increases your level of fulfillment. So they are directional. So they're both additive and directional. Just as we used the characteristics of pain and pleasure to create a graph, a two-dimensional graph of the representation of our state of our unconscious mind, we can use the characteristics of victimization and fulfillment to create a similar looking graph with respect to the state of our conscious mind. Now, unlike pain, which must dominate pleasure, we don't have any necessity for victimization and fulfillment to have different ultimate maximums for intensity. So we just depict them as having from a scale of 0 to 10, 0 to 10. We use the symbol negative and positive to indicate that they're directional, and we have a continuous location from 0 to plus and minus 10, where we can locate ourselves to indicate the intensities. And now comes the fun part of all of this, because we've shown that we have an experience of our conscious and unconscious minds that can be represented by two-dimensional graphs. And we know that the experience of our conscious and unconscious minds exists simultaneously. So we can take those two linear graphs and combine them into a single two-dimensional graph. And this is going to give us the answer to our question of what is happiness and how we can use it in our life. When we combine the two graphs, the state of being of our conscious mind and the state of being of our unconscious mind, into a single two-dimensional representation, then we get a graph like this, where we have our conscious mind existing on the vertical axis between fulfillment and victimization, and our unconscious mind existing between a state of pain and pleasure on the horizontal axis. And if we plot our position on the unconscious mind graph between pain and pleasure with the sum of all of our experience and the stimuli that we're experiencing at any one time. We plot ourselves on that graph and we also on that axis, and we plot ourselves on the fulfillment and victimization line, the conscious mind line. Then we get a position. We can position ourselves on this plane, somewhere on this plane between um, pain, fulfillment, pleasure, and victimization. But when we plot ourselves on those two axes, and for example, if we found out that we were experiencing at this time in our life a combination of pain but fulfillment, then we'd say we're in a quadrant that we'll name burnout. Because in this quadrant, we're experiencing high levels of fulfillment, but it's causing us a lot of pain. So, an example of something like that could be that you're a senior executive and you're working 18 hours a day, but as a result of that, your relationships are faltering. You're not getting the pleasure that you would expect from that. In fact, it's causing you pain. Your health may be suffering as well too. So that's typical example of what you would consider to be burnout. Combination of high levels of fulfillment and high levels of pain simultaneous. Or in another example, if we were experiencing high levels of helplessness and victimization on our conscious mind, but also lots of pain, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain, doesn't matter, then we'd say that category would be what we would consider to be depression. That does not necessarily mean that that's a clinical definition of depression. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not a doctor, don't try and tend to be. But if you were to try and categorize, try to put a name on that quadrant that describes our experience of simultaneous pain and victimization, you say that's typical of what you would consider to be depression. Now, if you were experiencing a combination of pleasure simultaneous with victimization or helplessness, we'd say that that's typical of what we would consider to be some sort of addiction because or addictive behavior. And don't forget, it's a combination of all aspects of being human, mind, body, and spirit. So if you're experiencing a lot of pleasure, but you can't control it, you have no control over your life, you have no ability to do anything other than that, you can't create any fulfillment in your life, then that's what we would call someone who's uh, displaying addictive behavior. And that, of course, just leaves one quadrant in our state of being, and that is the state of being where we're experiencing both fulfillment in our conscious mind and pleasure in our unconscious mind. And in that quadrant where we're experiencing both fulfillment and pleasure simultaneously would be happiness. So now we've gone from just the absolute bare understanding, common understanding of the knowledge of what it's like to be human. We've organized it into a way that we can actually depict the nature of happiness as part of our state of being, and we have a functional definition of happiness that can be used both to understand what it is and where we are in our life, but also how we can move from one area of unhappiness to happiness. So this is the definition of happiness. Happiness is a state of being comprising both fulfillment and pleasure. So although that graph is useful for us to understand what happiness is, it would be even far more useful for us to understand how we could use it to increase the amount of happiness that we have in our life, regardless of where we are at our current existing state of being. We can move to a state of happiness if we know and understand how the graph works and what it tells us. So let me just start out with an example of someone who is happy. So this is an example of happiness. So somebody, after they've looked at all of their total experiences of pain and pleasure that they're experiencing in their life, they plot themselves as number two between 0 and 10, plus two on that scale. And then on the conscious scale, they're experiencing more fulfillment than they are. The sum of all the things that they're doing create more fulfillment than does victimization. That puts them on the +3 scale. So they're in this happiness quadrant. They're at a level of 2 on the pleasure side and 3 on the uh, fulfillment side. Now let's look at it in a slightly different way. And where we said that somebody existed as a 2, 3 on the happiness scale, let's, instead of saying that we currently exist in that state, but rather we would like to be in that state. But we're currently in a state of burnout, which means that we're at -4 on the pain and pleasure side, but we're at +8 on the fulfillment side. Okay, we're getting a lot of great things done in our life and we're really getting a lot of pride and pleasure from it, but it's causing us to have poor relationships at home, whatever. So we're in this quadrant. How would we get from there to the happiness level of 2 and 3? Well, clearly we see that we have to move the pleasure side from -4 to +2, which is a movement of 6 on that scale. And we would have to reduce our fulfillment to get to that 2, 3 from 8 to 3. And that makes sense, really, when you think about it, because if you're getting a lot of uh, fulfillment from the things that you're doing, but it's hurting you, you're going to have to change some of your priorities from putting time into the things that are creating fulfillment and move them into the things that are creating pleasure. And by doing so, by reducing the amount of fulfillment you get, you can increase the amount of pleasure. So you can actually move into a happier state by doing less. And instead of starting out with the burnout example, we look instead at a depressive example where someone's sitting at -7 and -5. That's -7 on the pain pleasure side. They're experiencing a lot of pain and they have little hope, minimal hope that they can do things that they do anything about it. Then for them to become happy, they're going to have to increase both. They have to increase their fulfillment and they're going to have to increase their pleasure, perhaps by a substantial amount to get from there to there. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to do it in a short period of time. You can do it in stages. You can do it in pieces. You can pick specific tasks that are going to get you closer and closer to that goal, and then you move from there to there. So that can bring you to happiness if you know where you are. If you know, but if you know, but if you don't know that you're experiencing this, you don't understand that the things that you're doing are causing you to be in that depressive area, then how do you know how to move to happiness? So the beauty of the state of being chart is that it shows you where you are. And then if you create a target of where you want to be, you can see the shortest way to get there. And similarly, if we happen to start out from the quadrant where we're saying we're experiencing a lot of pleasure and very little fulfillment, victimization, helplessness, then if we wanted to move from that quadrant up to a quadrant of happiness, the 2, 3 target, then we want to increase our fulfillment by 6 Yeah, because we're at -3 right now. We have to go to +3. We want to decrease our pleasure by 6. You have to decrease. So you have to give up some of the things that are creating pleasure for you so you can create some fulfillment in your life. And you'll know that by looking at where you are. If you remember at the beginning of the seminar, I asked people whether they're happy, and some responded yes. And I asked people, would they like to be happier? And some responded yes as well. Some of those that responded yes to wanting to be happier were already happy. So there's nothing to stop us from taking a position of being already in a position where we are happy and moving to a position where we are happier. We want to continue our journey towards being happy. We can continue it on through our entire life. In fact, you really have to in order to maintain the happiness because the fulfillment part of things require us to keep on doing things to create fulfillment in our life. A pleasure can be something we experience, to be sure, but if you want to move up higher, then you certainly can. So if you are currently at a 2-3 and you want to move to a 7-8, then you would have to find some activities that are going to increase your fulfillment by 5 and some experiences that are going to increase your pleasure by 5. So you can move from a state of happiness to a state of greater happiness. So all of the discussions that we've had so far about where we are on the state of being chart and where we want to get to on the state of being chart so that we can know what we have to do in order to get there, it all requires us to be able to position ourselves on the chart. And we need to be able to do it with some level of, if not precision, because people will evaluate themselves in different categories in different ways, but at least some repeatability so that for you evaluating yourself on the happiness chart leads you to always be at this position when those things happen to you. And then if you want to move closer to being into happiness or farther up the happiness scale, you know the things that are going to be doing it. So repeatability is at least as important as precision, but we need to be able to position ourselves on that chart. And that's not that easy to do because there are so many things that create pain and pleasure in our lives simultaneously. And there are so many things that create fulfillment or could create fulfillment if we chose to do them or that are happening to us and create victimization in our lives. So in order to take a look at where you actually belong, in order to make sure that you haven't neglected something or you are missing out on something, we have to be a little bit more granular. And so we look at humans being made up of mind, body, and spirit. That's the traditional view of what it is to be human. We have a mind, body, and a spirit. They're all interrelated. You can't have one without the other. You can't separate them and just work on one and not the other. They're all together. They're all part of us. So we need to evaluate our states in each of those categories, and then we'll combine them and plot ourselves on our current state of being. That leads to a much more precise way of measuring our state of being. It also leads to a much more repeatable way of measuring our state of being. When we look at the traditional view of the components of being human, of being mind, body, and spirit, with respect to body and spirit, we can come up with a number of categories and factors that we can look at that would help us to position ourselves on those charts. But when we look at the category of mind, it's broader, it's more difficult to define. So, in order to make it possible to get a better experience of what our mind is creating for us, we break it into two categories: our accomplishments, the things that we've done in our life, the things that we're trying to do in our life, the things that we enjoy doing. It could be work related, it could be personal activity, mountain climbing, running, anything like that, art, you know, writing a book, some accomplishments that you want to do, and then our relationships. And clearly, our relationships are a huge part of what it is to be, about defining whether or not we're happy. So we want to look at those two things separately. So those two things comprise the category of mind. And so we're going to look at what happens when we take a look at what is our state of being with respect to our accomplishments. State of being means our conscious and unconscious minds, the contributions to pain, pleasure, and fulfillment and victimization. And separately looking at our relationships, and the relationships are fairly complicated. Okay, anybody could have, doesn't necessarily have to have, but could have a spouse, could have parents, could have children, could have other relations, family, could have friends, colleagues, um, clients, customers, and general public. A huge amount of things going on in relationships. So we break it into those categories to make it a little bit more granular so that we can take a look at where we are with respect to all of those. So when we break it down into these four components of being happy, and we say we have a state of being for each of those four categories, this would be the one we use for our state of our accomplishments. And in subsequent seminars, we're going to take a look at each one of these categories, um, accomplishments, relationships, body, and spirit, and take a look at each one of those and how we can move ourselves more into the happiness quadrant from wherever we happen to be. But when we are experiencing, with respect to our accomplishments, a combination of fulfillment and pleasure, we call that quadrant success. That's the goal of where we want to be with respect to our state, the state of being of our accomplishments. We want to create success. And similarly, when we look at our state of being with respect to our relationships, that's all the relationships that we have in our life, then we want to be in a position where, for the most part, we're experiencing fulfillment and pleasure from our relationships. We may not be experiencing fulfillment and pleasure from all our relationships. This is the sum of it all. And so we can take a look separately at things like our relationship with our spouse, with our partner, with our children, with our parents, with our relationships with our family, with our friends and colleagues and coworkers and even the general public. If we can create some experience of love within that, then we're moving towards happiness. Obviously, with respect to our state of being of our body, we want to be healthy, clear, simple, and necessary. It is not necessary for you to have good health in order for you to be happy. Um, for example, my hero, Jane Marchesky, was not healthy, and yet she chose to be happy. She declared she was going to be happy, and she was, and she shared her happiness with people in the world through her singing. Uh, but the farther you are away from being healthy, then the more difficult it is for you to be happy. So even if you can't ever be really healthy, there are some things that you can't overcome within your body. At least you can move to become more healthy. That would be the goal ultimately. And so we talk a lot about things that we can do with respect to that. I do watch a YouTube channel. It's called Girl with Wings, and it is about a girl. She's 30, early 30s, and she has a child, and she was born without arms. And she says, don't look at what I don't have, look at what I can do. And she has a full and happy life. She's an artist. She uses her feet to draw. She uses her feet to take care of her child. It's quite amazing. It's just uplifting and great to watch. But she's a happy person, even though she has some limitations on what she can do. Don't look at what she doesn't have. Look at what she can do. Our state of being with respect to spirit is one of the most misunderstood aspects of being human that we have. No question. Um, it's become spirituality has become associated with religion, but it isn't the same. It isn't necessarily the same. There are many people who are religious who are not overly spiritual, who are feeling a lot of unhappiness with respect to their spirituality. There are a lot of people who are spiritual who don't believe in God, who don't have a religion, they don't have a formal religion, and yet they're very spiritual. We're all spiritual by nature. So understanding what it means to be spiritual, to have a spirit as part of our components is a key part of being happy. And we do talk a lot about what that means. So we are part of something bigger and greater than ourselves. That's the whole point of being spiritual. And we have a lot of things that we do in our lives to connect with the greater experience around us, the universe, connection with the universe. We walk outside and we walk in the woods and we say, oh, we suddenly experience something bigger and greater than ourselves. There's beauty all around us. And we capture that beauty and put it into things like music and art and sculpture and architecture. And these are Spiritual experiences. We need to understand those and start taking advantage of those to create more. And certainly, if you believe in God, then connection to God is a key component to your spirituality, the spiritual nature of you. That's unique to you, and anybody can experience that. But you can experience, and will experience, and do experience spirituality without necessarily being religious. So, to achieve sustainable happiness, when we look at the four categories of being human, the components of being human, we strive to be in that positive quadrant where we're experiencing a combination of fulfillment and pleasure. And that is the areas of success for our accomplishments, love for our relationships, health for our body, and connection to our spirituality. And in the next seminars, we're going to take a look at each of those components of happiness and determine how we can plot our state in each of those components and then find simple methods to increase happiness in each component. Now, I could just terminate the seminar at this point because we've already derived a fully functional definition of happiness. We've already seen how we can use that definition to understand what our current level of happiness is and how we can move from that level to another level that we choose. Um, but then we'll get into more details about how we can do that in subsequent seminars. But I don't want to leave without leaving you with some important concepts that are related to happiness and related to what we discussed. And one of those is I say excellence and happiness are related. So, what actually is excellence? Well, excellence is the result that we get when from the creation of results that bring us a combination of pleasure and fulfillment. So when we do something great, we get a book done, we write a book, or we climb a mountain, or we run a marathon. That creates That's an excellent result, right? And it creates, when we get an excellent result like that, regardless of what it is, maybe it's something smaller, like I planted a flower today, it was excellent, or I told a joke and it was excellent. It's the creation of results that bring us pleasure and fulfillment. When we're creating results so pleasure and fulfillment, that is the description of our state of being of happiness. So therefore, excellence is the creation of happiness. Important concept. Another important concept that we're going to dwell on a lot is, are you perfect? And if someone was to ask you whether or not you were perfect, we would all probably agree, we should agree, it is impossible for a human being to be perfect. But even though we can't be perfect, being excellent is a perfect way for a human being to be. Being excellent is the creation of results, remember, that bring us fulfillment and pleasure. It does not imply that in order to be excellent, you can never make a mistake. So you can be excellent. You can create happiness in your life. That is a perfect way for a human being to be. So, yes, you're. So during subsequent seminars, we're going to dwell on some of these issues and spend some time on teaching you how to improve your health, increase your success in your life, bring more love into your life through your relationships, increase your spiritual connection to something that's way bigger than ourselves. We'll also be talking a lot about what are emotions, so we talk about pain and pleasure. Okay, that's clear. But what are things like fear and anger and hate, even? Okay, greed. What are emotions? How do they work? What do we do? What do we need to do about them? Self-limiting beliefs. Self-limiting beliefs are things that are holding us back. We don't believe we're good enough. We don't believe we're thin enough or fast enough. Um, we're unlovable. Those are all self-limiting beliefs that hinder our ability to create happiness in our lives. We want to find out what those things are and how to utilize them to create happiness. Second, or not second, but subsequent to that, we want to talk about what is your purpose in life. You know, how can you create the most fulfillment in your life knowing what you know now, doing the things that you do now with the skills and talents that you have available to you? And then I will give you a computer program that allows you to go through all those steps and then sum it all up to push you to position yourself on that um, happiness quadrant. And before you leave here, I didn't want you to leave without having some simple techniques that you can use right away to start increasing the happiness that you're experiencing in your life. Um, and you can also use these as we get deeper into the details of what happiness can be. But this will give you something to start working on, creating additional happiness for yourself right now. The first thing that I want to give you is a technique for communicating in a way that creates excellence around you with other people that you're dealing with all the time, and increases your happiness. So there are five things that we do all the time, and I spend a lot of time trying to just analyzing how people talk to each other and the things that cause them to react negatively to the things that they're hearing. And these are five C's. I put them in there so they're easy to remember. I found the words that are closest to the category that's not working, and found words that start with C's. And this covers pretty much everything that's going to cause negative result when you communicate with people. These are the five C's that curtail conversation and crush connection. So since these are the five C's that cause a negative reaction, these are the things that you want to avoid doing, that you want to stop doing to other people. And when you experience them from other people, it's really difficult to get them to stop. So don't, but just recognize them in other people and recognizing what it's doing to you and respond in a positive way. And I'll show you how to do that too. But here are the categories. Compare. Don't compare people to other people, or compare them to other results, or compare their results to other things. Don't correct them if they make mistakes or minor mistakes, unless it's something that's for a matter of safety, you have to do it. But if it's just to correct them, so that all these things do is make people feel uh, smaller, uh, like they're not very important. Don't criticize them for things that they say or do or they believe. You know, don't complain like that's something about you. Okay, say don't. I feel terrible today, or that the world is coming to an end because the person that I voted for didn't get in or whatever. And don't cajole. Don't constantly go after people to get them to do things that you want to have them to do. Don't cajole. Don't do those five things, and listen for them in other people. And if you become angry or defensive or cry or depressed when you are talking to somebody, it's because they've done these things to you. So you don't want them to do it to you, but don't try and correct them when they do it, and respond in a positive way when it happens. Don't do these things to other people. You'll get a much better result. So it isn't fair for me to just tell you what not to do, because what does that leave you to talk about? How can you talk to other people if you can't criticize, complain, correct, cajole, uh, and compare? Well, there are some things that you can do that are very positive. These are the things that will create connection with other people when you're talking to them or writing to them. And it can be done for all your relationships, whether it's your spouse, your children, your coworkers, colleagues, friends, relatives. These are the five E's. I've made them all starting with E. Five E's that embrace empowerment and enhance engagement. And I will maintain that the positive ways of communicating are contained within these five things. Entertain doesn't necessarily mean you have to sing and do a song and dance. You know, you can tell them a funny story. You can tell them a joke. You can just tell them a story that's interesting. You can tell them something that's inspirational rather than anything that's that, but entertain. Empathize. Very important when you're trying to create connection with somebody, that you let them know that you understand what they're feeling and that it's okay for them to be feeling that, and you would feel the same way too if you were in their position, something like that. Okay, that's empathize. You want to create a connection, you want to create rapport with people when you're talking to them. Encourage. When they do something, tell them that's wonderful, continue to do that, and they'll receive that positively rather than saying, you didn't do that as well as you could have done. Encourage them, say you did a great job getting to where you are. Extol. You praise somebody. Okay, you can praise them directly to them. You can praise them to other people when you're talking about them. Oh, my husband is very good at um, building tree houses. Why don't you have him come over and help your kids build a tree house? Something like that. I'm making all that up. Exchange. And ultimately, the primary reason for communicating with other people is to exchange ideas and thoughts and feelings. And so that is a positive thing to continue can do. So Those are the five things you can do, the five E's that embrace empowerment, enhance engagement. Do these, don't do the five C's. Write these down, remember them, whatever it has to be. Recognize the five C's when you hear them. Recognize them in the things that people are saying to you, and recognize them in the things that you are saying to other people, and avoid them. And if you do get attacked, necessarily, maybe a bad word, but when you do experience the five C's, respond with one of the five E's. That's how you break that pattern. And lastly, I just want to leave you with a simple task, a simple way to create excellence in your life. And excellence is the creation of happiness. It's the result that brings us pleasure and fulfillment. Take an action. You have to do something. So take an action, evaluate the outcome, analyze the error if there is any. Maybe the error is zero, doesn't matter, but analyze the error, decide on the next step based on what you've done, and take the next action. Did it bring me the pleasure and fulfillment I was expecting? No, didn't, because I didn't do this. So let's go back and do that. So there are lots of things that we do in our life that constantly require us to make an error to make progress. One of the examples I use all the time about a process like that is walking. So when you're walking, like when you're standing still, you're in an equilibrium state. Okay, you're not moving forward, you're not moving backwards, you're standing in one position. In order for you to move forward, you actually have to introduce an error into the system. You have to lean forward so you can no longer balance in place. And then in order to prevent yourself from falling, you move your foot forward, and then you bring the other foot as you're continuing to fall, you bring the other foot forward and stop yourself from falling. So walking is a process that always requires us to be making a mistake. In fact, we have to introduce a mistake into the process in order for us to make progress. And so that's not an uncommon thing to happen when we're trying to get something done. So don't ever say to yourself, I've made a mistake. I'm a stupid person. It's a terrible thing. I'm useless. I'm unlovable, whatever it happens to be. It's a self-limiting belief that you have. It's not true. Don't ever criticize yourself. Always be prepared to take a risk, and be prepared when you do something that doesn't get you the result that you want, not to call it even a mistake, but to say instead, hey, I didn't get where I was expecting to get. What do I have to do in order to get there? And do that next. Never ever criticize yourself. Never ever use the five C's on yourself. If you're ever going to take away anything from that, don't ever use one of those five C's on yourself. Never ever criticize yourself, and often take time to celebrate your success. Thank you all for being here to take a little bit of time to understand the nature of happiness and how you can create happiness in your life and the happiness in the lives of others, frankly. And I hope my wish for you is that you find love, success, health, and connection. Be happy, and remember, you are perfect.